Evelyn Marlowe had already said goodbye to the only dangerous man she had ever loved before the first guest took their seat. That was what she told herself while the bridal suite buzzed around her with pins, perfume, satin, and shallow breathing. Her maid of honor kept smoothing the train of her gown as if wrinkles were the greatest threat waiting downstairs. Her mother kept checking the mirror behind Evelyn's shoulder with the strained smile of a woman holding herself together by force. Outside the tall windows, late spring rain silvered the gardens of Ashford Hall and softened the stone fountain until everything looked blurred at the edges, like a memory someone had touched too often. It should have felt romantic. Safe. Earned. Instead, Evelyn felt as if she were standing very still in the middle of a room that was moving away from her. Nathan Ashford was exactly the kind of man people congratulated you for marrying. Controlled, polished, old money handsome in a way that photographs loved. He never raised his voice, never forgot a birthday, never arrived anywhere unprepared. When her father died and creditors began circling Marlowe House like birds over a field, Nathan had been there with calm words, discreet lawyers, a hand pressed to the small of her back as if steadiness itself had taken human form. Everyone called him dependable. Her mother called him salvation. Evelyn had called him yes. So why did her pulse feel wrong? She blamed the dress first. Then the room. Then the rain. Then the fact that weddings turned women into public property for a day, each smile borrowed, each movement observed. But the truth kept flickering beneath every excuse like a match caught behind glass. The truth had a name she had trained herself not to think. Damien Vale. A year ago he had walked into Marlowe House with a black coat dark from rain, a predatory smile, and an offer that sounded too sharp to trust. Billionaire investor. Hotel acquisition specialist. Ruthless in business, impossible in person. The papers called him brilliant when they were being polite and merciless when they were not. Evelyn had called him arrogant to his face the first hour they met, which only made one corner of his mouth tilt as if insult amused him. She had hated that smile. She had hated the way it unsettled her even more. There had been nights after meetings when she still smelled his cologne on the corridors of the old hotel, cedar and spice and something cleaner underneath, and had to stop herself from turning around as if her body recognized him before her mind agreed to. There had been one terrible evening in the library, whiskey on the sideboard, lightning over the cliffs, her back against the shelves while he looked at her as if he saw every frightened thing she was trying to conceal. He had almost kissed her then. She had wanted him to. The wanting had humiliated her. Then he had disappeared from her life with a curt message through legal channels, and Nathan had been there to help gather what Damien had broken. At least that was the story she had wrapped around herself often enough to survive it. Evelyn. Her mother's voice cut gently through the room. It's time. The bridal suite fell quieter around that sentence. A zipper finished its climb. Someone handed Evelyn her bouquet. White garden roses, pale blush ranunculus, and trailing ivy from the west wall of Marlowe House, clipped at dawn. She stared at them for one suspended second and thought, absurdly, that flowers always look most fragile right before they were arranged for display. Then she walked. The ceremony was set in the long glass conservatory at the back of Ashford Hall. Candles burned inside hurricane lanterns along the aisle, though it was afternoon. String music rose and fell in the damp, perfumed air. Faces turned. Her veil softened the crowd into a watercolor of smiles and expectation. Nathan stood at the far end beside the officiant, immaculate in charcoal morning coat and silver tie, hands folded with the serene confidence of a man receiving what had already been decided. He looked handsome. He looked relieved. He looked, Evelyn thought with a surprising flash of distance, as if he belonged perfectly inside this room. Halfway down the aisle she saw him. Damien stood at the back, just beyond the last row, rain still darkening the shoulders of his black coat. No boutonniere. No polite expression. No attempt to blend. He looked like the kind of mistake fate made deliberately. For one violent beat the room disappeared. He had changed and not changed at all. The same powerful stillness. The same hard line of jaw. The same unsettling focus that made everyone else seem temporary when he chose a point in space and held it. His tie was undone, as if he had come straight from war or from refusing one. His dark hair was damp, pushed back carelessly. He was looking only at her. Evelyn's step faltered. Nathan noticed. "Evie," he said, soft enough to sound loving to anyone but her. Damien started forward. A murmur moved through the guests. Her maid of honor stiffened. Her mother turned pale. Nathan's expression fractured, not into anger but something quicker and uglier. Fear. That did not fit him. Nathan Ashford did not fear embarrassment. Nathan Ashford managed embarrassment. Damien reached the front just as Evelyn's bouquet slipped lower in her grip. One of the ushers moved to block him, but Damien didn't even look at the man. His gaze never left hers. "I need 30 seconds, he said. "This is not the time," Nathan snapped, "too fast." The conservatory went dead silent. Damien stopped an arm's length from Evelyn, close enough that she could smell rain and cedar and the cold air he had carried in with him. Up close he looked tired in a way she had never seen before, as if whatever had brought him here had cost him something real. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "No," he said. "But neither should he." Nathan took a step forward. "Security." Damien ignored him. His eyes locked to Evelyn's, fierce and steady and stripped of every polished edge she remembered. When he spoke again, his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. "If you say I do," he murmured, "Nathan owns Marlowe House by midnight, and your mother signed because he told her I ruined your father." He lied. The bouquet nearly fell from her hand. For a second she thought she had misheard him, that shock was translating nonsense into words she feared. But then Damien slid a folded document into her free hand, his fingers brushing hers once, warm and deliberate. She looked down. Her name. Nathan's name. The hotel. Share transfer conditions tied to marriage registration. The edges of the page blurred. "Nathan," she said, and even to her own ears her voice sounded like something cracking. Nathan's face changed again. Too controlled. Too careful. "It's not what you think," he said. The sentence was perfect. Which was exactly why it terrified her. Somewhere beyond the glass, thunder rolled far out over the sea. Guests shifted. The officiant looked stricken. Her mother made a small sound that might have been prayer or warning. Evelyn looked from Nathan's composed face to Damien's rain-dark coat to the document in her hand that suddenly weighed more than the bouquet, the dress, the room, the entire future she had been walking toward. "What did you do?" she asked Nathan. He took another step. "Evelyn, if you leave now, you will regret listening to him." Damien's voice stayed quiet. "If you stay, you won't get the chance." It was the calm certainty in that line that decided her. Not because she trusted him. Not yet. But because Nathan, for the first time since she had known him, looked like a man improvising. Evelyn lifted her skirt, turned before anyone could stop her, and walked back down the aisle to the stunned silence of 200 witnesses, her heart pounding so hard it made the world throb. By the time she reached the conservatory doors, footsteps followed behind her. She did not know whether she wanted them to belong to the man she had almost married or the man she had sworn to forget. When a hand caught the latch before she could fumble it open, she knew from the heat of that touch alone. Damien bent close, breath warm against her ear. "Don't run blind," he said. "Run with me." Evelyn did not answer until they were inside the old morning room and the doors were shut hard enough to muffle the chaos spilling through the conservatory behind them. The room smelled of extinguished fire and lilies. Rain tapped at the windows. Her bouquet lay abandoned on a side table where she had thrown it without looking. She turned on Damien so fast the silk at her knees hissed. "You had 1 year," she said. 1 year to say whatever righteous thing dragged you into my wedding, and you chose the 30 seconds before my vows. His jaw tightened. If I'd come sooner, Nathan would have buried it faster. That is not an answer. It's the only one I have. The document in her hand had already softened from the pressure of her grip. Evelyn spread it on the table with trembling fingers. Dense legal language filled the page, but she didn't need every clause to understand the shape of the trap. Marriage registration. Asset consolidation. Emergency collateral release. Marlowe House would transfer into a holding company tied to Nathan's development group if certain debt triggers were activated. The signatures at the bottom were a punch to the chest. Her mother's. Nathan's. A witness line left blank. Her own name appeared twice. When was this signed? She asked. 3 nights ago. My mother would never sign away the hotel. Damien's expression did something infuriatingly gentle. She didn't think she was. The room tilted. Evelyn braced both hands on the table, refusing to let him see how close she was to losing balance. Marlowe House was more than property. It was the cliffside hotel her great-grandmother had opened with 6 rooms and a stubborn belief that beauty could make people stay alive through grief. It was the business her father had expanded, the place Evelyn had grown up measuring summers by hydrangeas and winters by storm damage. It was debt-ridden and drafty and too expensive to save, but it was theirs. Or had been. What did he tell her? She asked. That the bank would call the loan if your family couldn't show unified ownership before quarter close. That the easiest way to protect the business was to temporarily move the controlling stake. He told her I'd triggered the debt provisions after your father died. You did trigger them. No, the word landed flat and hard. I bought time. He used it. She laughed once, a sharp, unbelieving sound. You expect me to trust your version of anything? No, he said. I expect you to verify it. Someone hammered on the morning room door. Nathan's voice came through, tightly measured. Evelyn, open the door. We can resolve this privately. Like hell, Damien muttered. Evelyn ignored both men for a second and stared at the rain threading down the panes. Her wedding shoes pinched. Her hairpins hurt. Everything ridiculous and ceremonial about her suddenly made her want to scream. A year ago, when Damien Vale first arrived at Marlowe House, she had been wearing an old navy sweater, no makeup, and anger like armor. He had come from London by helicopter after a deal collapsed in Monaco, or at least that was the rumor the staff whispered before he stepped into the lobby with a leather folder and enough confidence to insult the wallpaper. He had toured the ballroom, the kitchens, the sea-facing suites, and her father's office with the detached focus of a man pricing a jewel he did not intend to cherish. She had decided to hate him within minutes. Then he had stayed until midnight reviewing accounts with her. He had rolled up his sleeves, loosened his tie, and asked precise questions no one else had asked. Not how quickly they could liquidate, but which renovations actually increased winter bookings. Not whether the staff could be reduced, but which employees held the place together by force of memory and competence. He had looked cold while saying compassionate things and warm while delivering ruthless facts, and the contradiction had made her wary in ways charm never could. Nathan had entered her life during the months after Damien left. Nathan had been comforting where Damien was disruptive, reassuring where Damien was sharp. He took her to quiet restaurants. He introduced her to bankers who spoke gently. He never made her feel exposed. With Nathan, love had seemed like something one could build through courtesy and patience. With Damien, it had felt like standing too close to a cliff edge and hearing the sea call your real name. The door rattled again. Evie, Nathan said, abandoning the formal use of her name. Please. He's manipulating you. Damien folded his arms. Open it if you want. But don't sign anything. And don't let him get you near the registrar. Evelyn looked up sharply. Registrar? Your marriage license doesn't become useful until it's filed. The car waiting at the west entrance isn't for your honeymoon. It's taking signed documents to the registrar's office and then to the bank's counsel. He was watching her too carefully, as if measuring the exact second truth turned from noise into pattern. She hated that he still read her so easily. You investigated my wedding? I investigated Ashford Capital after I got a call from one of your house managers crying in my office because two men had shown up taking photographs of structural easements. Her breath caught. Margot? Yes. Evelyn closed her eyes. Margot had worked at Marlowe House since before Evelyn was born. She had polished silver through recessions, funerals, and one disastrous theme weekend involving jazz and flaming desserts. If Margot had called Damien, it meant someone at the hotel had been frightened enough to reach beyond pride. The morning room door opened a fraction before Damien shoved it shut with one hand. Nathan had his palm against the wood on the other side. Enough, Nathan said, his voice losing polish. Evelyn, this is between us. No, Damien said. That's the first true thing said all day. It stopped being between you two when you used her mother's grief as a business strategy. Silence. Then the slow retreat of Nathan's footsteps. Evelyn's stomach dropped lower. You enjoy this, she said, because anger was easier than fear. Interrupting. Winning. His expression went still in that dangerous way she remembered. If I wanted to win, I would have let you marry him. The line hit too hard because some part of her believed it. Outside, voices rose in confusion. Guests were being redirected. Her mother was probably unraveling. Society photographers were probably already smelling blood. One wrong move from here, and the wedding would become scandal by sunset. Yet beneath the humiliation, another truth was forming with merciless clarity. Nathan had not come after her pounding on the door again. Nathan, who always pursued order, was now busy protecting optics. What proof do you actually have? She asked. Damien reached inside his coat and set a slim flash drive beside the contract. Emails. Transfer drafts. A recording of Nathan's CFO discussing post-marriage redevelopment plans for the hotel site. The hotel site? Luxury residences. He keeps the facade. Demolishes most of the West Wing. Something cold and ancient moved through her chest. Marlowe House without the West Wing was like imagining her father without laughter. It was not merely change. It was desecration. Evelyn picked up the drive, then looked at Damien. If this is another one of your half-truths, I swear I will destroy you. For the first time since he entered the conservatory, the edge in his face softened into something raw. I know, he said. There was no defense in it. No arrogance. Just recognition. Beyond the windows, the rain intensified until the lawns disappeared behind gray sheets. Evelyn straightened, every layer of silk and satin suddenly feeling absurdly theatrical for what came next. Take me to Marlowe House, she said. If Nathan wants it, I want to see what's worth stealing. Damien stepped back and opened the door for her. This time, when she walked out, she did not feel like a bride leaving a ceremony unfinished. She felt like the rightful heir returning to a battlefield with the one man she should never have trusted and could not afford not to. The drive to Marlowe House took 83 minutes in weather that made the cliffs look cut from wet slate. Evelyn knew because she counted every one of them. She had changed in the back seat of Damien's car while his driver kept his eyes fixed on the road and the privacy screen stayed raised. Her wedding gown lay in a heap beside her like the shed skin of someone more obedient. She pulled on dark trousers, a cream blouse, and the cashmere coat her maid of honor had thrust into her arms before whispering, half shocked and half thrilled, if you're going to ruin a wedding, at least do it in good tailoring. The veil she left behind without regret. Now she sat in the front passenger seat because the back had felt too much like surrender. Damien drove the last stretch himself after dismissing the driver at the turnoff to the coast road. His hands were steady on the wheel. His profile stayed hard against the changing light. He had not tried to fill the silence, which somehow made the silence louder. At last Evelyn said, if the hotel was at risk, why didn't you come to me first? He kept his eyes on the road. I did. 3 times. She turned to him. No, you didn't. I sent requests through your solicitor last month. They were declined. I called your mother. She said you were under enough strain and she wouldn't have old wounds reopened before the wedding. My mother spoke to you? Yes. You said nothing. You were in a church aisle, Evelyn. The way he said her name made it sound less like a formality and more like something he had gone too long without using. She looked away first. The sea appeared beyond the rise, steel-gray and restless. Then the hotel came into view, perched above the cliffs exactly where it had always been, magnificent and exhausted. Marlowe House was all pale stone, ivy, and long windows facing weather like an old aristocrat refusing to admit weakness. Evelyn's throat tightened so suddenly she had to press her teeth together. Home. The front drive was not empty. 2 dark sedans stood near the entrance, and 3 men in city suits were talking under the porte-cochere while staff hovered in uncertain clusters. Margot herself stood in the doorway, stout and rigid, her silver hair pinned in its usual immaculate twist and her expression murderous enough to stop traffic. When Damien pulled up, all 3 suited men turned. Well, Margot said as Evelyn got out, I was beginning to think I'd have to set one of them on fire to make a point. Relief hit Evelyn so hard it almost became laughter. She crossed the wet stones in 3 quick strides and caught Margot's hands. What happened? They arrived with clipboards and smiles, Margot said. Which is always a sign of moral failure. They say they're here for a redevelopment inspection. They're not authorized, Damien said behind Evelyn. One of the men stepped forward. Mr. Vale. We were invited by Ashford Capital. Then Ashford Capital can inspect a building it owns, Damien replied. This one it does not. The man's smile thinned. That depends which documents are filed by close of business. The contempt in Damien's face could have frozen boiling water. Leave. We have legal access. You have bad timing and worse information, Evelyn said, stepping around Damien before she could stop herself. The men's attention shifted to her, recognition dawning a beat late. So did discomfort. She supposed jilted brides from old families were not supposed to arrive at contested hotels in a black car with a billionaire and murder in their eyes. I am Evelyn Marlowe, she said. And until a court says otherwise, this property remains under family management. If you enter without consent, I will have your names, your firms, and your employers in every paper by dinner. Margot, if one of them touches the front step, call the police. Margot's smile sharpened with pride. Gladly. The men left 10 minutes later after 2 calls, 1 threat from Damien's legal counsel on speakerphone, and a rain-soaked standoff that left Evelyn shaking with adrenaline. When the last sedan disappeared down the drive, the hotel staff exhaled as one body. Inside, warmth and memory hit her together. Beeswax polish. Old wood. Coffee from the breakfast room. Damp coat steaming near the lobby radiators. The chandelier still needed rewiring. The umbrella stand still leaned. The portrait of her great-grandmother still looked unimpressed by men with money. Evelyn stood in the center of the lobby and felt the hotel seeing her, not sentimentally but truthfully. She belonged here most on the days that demanded something from her. Margot took her coat. Your mother called twice. Evelyn winced. I'll ring her soon. Margot lowered her voice. And Mr. Simon arrived this morning, went straight to your father's study, and vanished 15 minutes before the inspectors. Her cousin. Of course. Simon Marlowe had inherited the family charm without any of the discipline. He had also acquired debts the way other people acquired hobbies. Her father had loved him anyway. Evelyn had spent years confusing affection and responsibility on Simon's behalf. Did he take anything? She asked. Margot's mouth flattened. Only whatever fit in his conscience. Damien met Evelyn's gaze. Study first. The room had not changed much since her father's death. Dark shelves. Leaded windows. The brass lamp with the green shade he had loved. His fountain pen still resting in its tray as if he might return from lunch and ask why everyone looked so grave. Grief had a way of preserving objects more efficiently than any museum. Evelyn moved behind the desk and opened drawers with hands that remembered where everything belonged. Old guest ledgers. Maintenance contracts. A tin of cuff links. Damien searched the built-in cabinet near the fireplace, efficient and silent. He seemed almost too large for the room and yet oddly careful in it, as if he understood he was trespassing on sacred ground. "You were here after the funeral," she said without looking at him. He paused. "Yes. You never came into this room while I was in it." "No." "Why?" A beat passed. Then another. "Because you cried here." She stopped moving. He was still facing the cabinet when he said it, but his voice had changed. Lower. Rougher around the edges. "I heard you through the hall door the night after everyone left," he said. "I knew if I came in, I wouldn't keep the conversation about business." Heat rose under her skin with painful speed. A year vanished. She could see it suddenly, the cracked open house after the funeral, the rain at the windows, the suffocating sympathy of guests who had finally gone. She had locked herself in the study thinking she was alone. Damien had been in the corridor hearing her break. Damien. Found something. He straightened with a slim black ledger in hand. Inside were coded payment records, property notes, and one set of entries not coded at all. Several transfers from a shell company Evelyn did not recognize into an account Simon controlled. Adjacent notes. NA Phase 1. License first. West Wing after marriage consolidation. Her stomach turned. "Nathan and Simon," she said. "Looks that way." She looked up at Damien. The room seemed suddenly smaller, the air more charged. Rain tapped the windows. Their breathing sounded too audible. He had removed his coat somewhere downstairs, his shirt sleeves were rolled to the forearms, revealing the strong, spare lines of a man who could have been born in a boardroom and still somehow looked more dangerous in old houses. "You really came to stop me," she said quietly. He held her gaze. "I came because no one was going to take this place while you were promising forever to the wrong man." Before she could answer, the first camera flash went off outside the front windows. Then another. Margot's footsteps hurried down the corridor, followed by her voice, grim and urgent. "Miss Evelyn," she called, "the press are here, and Mr. Ashford has just given them a statement." Nathan's statement was playing on 3 phones, 2 tablets, and the lobby television within 6 minutes. He had not looked shaken. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed as the local news replayed a clip from the steps of Ashford Hall. He looked sorrowful. Noble, even. He spoke of an unfortunate misunderstanding, of the strain Evelyn had suffered since her father's death, of concern for her well-being after she was drawn away from the ceremony by a man with whom her family had a difficult financial history. Drawn away. As though she were a gullible child led by a glittering object. As though Damien had bewitched her and Nathan were simply the patient victim of feminine instability. A sharp little sound escaped her before she could stop it. Rage often arrived in her body that way now, not as a shout but as one involuntary crack in the voice that meant if she opened the door fully, nothing gentle would survive. Damien muted the television. "He's framing the narrative," he said. "I know what he's doing." He looked at her carefully. "Then don't react where he expects." She turned on him. "He just implied I'm emotionally compromised in front of half the county and every donor who still matters to this place. And if you storm onto the front steps right now, he gets to call that proof." She hated that he was right. She hated more that she needed him to be. The lobby had become command center by necessity. Margot organized tea, staff briefings, and strategic contempt. Damien's legal director joined by video call from London. Evelyn's mother arrived just after 4 in the afternoon wearing pearls, rain on her coat, and a face so pale it looked lit from within by grief. The moment she saw Damien, her expression tightened. The moment she saw Evelyn unharmed, it cracked. "Oh, darling." Evelyn met her in the middle of the lobby and let herself be held for one brief second before pulling back. "Did you know?" Her mother closed her eyes. The answer landed before the words did. "I knew Nathan had proposed restructuring options," her mother said quietly. "I did not know he intended to force them through today. He said it was temporary. He said if the marriage went ahead, the bank would calm down and the hotel would be protected while we recovered. By giving him control." "I thought it was symbolic control," her mother whispered. "He said all men like to feel useful." Damien made a low, disgusted sound. It was rude and entirely deserved. Her mother's gaze sharpened on him. "And you? You vanish for months, then arrive at her wedding as though detonating her life is some grand act of rescue." Evelyn expected Damien's usual ice. Instead he answered with dangerous restraint. "If I had arrived 10 minutes later, your daughter would have signed away the West Wing while smiling for photographers." Silence spread between the three of them. Her mother sank onto the nearest chair as if her knees had finally given up their campaign. "I didn't know about the West Wing," she said. "God help me, I didn't know." Evelyn believed her. Not because her mother was blameless, but because this was exactly how manipulation worked inside exhausted families. It came dressed as expertise. It spoke soothingly. It asked for trust where comprehension had become too expensive to maintain. "I need every paper you signed," Evelyn said. Her mother nodded once. "They're in my room." By evening the rain had deepened into a storm, and Marlowe House had no choice but to continue operating while the family imploded. A wedding party from Bristol expected dinner at 7. 2 late check-ins needed upgraded rooms because of a plumbing issue. One celebrity columnist, delighted by the presence of scandal, asked if the hotel offered a jilted bride special. Margot assigned him the room above the service entrance near the faulty pipe and called it diplomacy. Evelyn spent 2 hours at a table in the old map room with Damien and 3 open folders between them. The more they found, the uglier Nathan became. There were clauses hidden beneath emergency financing language. Secondary transfer options linked to marital status. Development sketches for cliffside residences where the West Wing stood now. And tucked in a separate envelope from her mother's bag, a drafted press strategy for announcing a visionary restoration partnership, once the marriage and filings were complete. Her fingers went cold as she read. This was a takeover wrapped as romance. Damien's gaze never left the page he held. "Yes. And my mother signed because she was frightened." "Yes. And Simon took money." "Yes." She stared at him. "Do you enjoy always being right?" "Only when the alternative is losing." The old answer might have infuriated her. Tonight it almost made her smile. At 8:30 the power flickered. Wind hit the west side of the hotel with a force that made the windows groan. Staff lit candles in the corridors and moved guests away from the lounge windows facing the cliffs. Evelyn went downstairs to help because that was what one did at Marlowe House in weather and grief alike. One kept service moving until the crisis remembered it had not broken you yet. She found Damien in the kitchen 10 minutes later carrying crates of bottled water as though he had been born to emergencies rather than boardrooms. His shirt clung damply to his shoulders. The kitchen staff, initially suspicious of him as all sensible people should have been, had accepted his usefulness with the practical speed of people too busy to preserve class distinctions. He carried 4 of the damn things at once, one cook whispered to Evelyn as if relaying scandal. And he fixed the latch on cold storage. Evelyn walked in to find Damien setting down the last crate while cook's steam curled around him. "You fixing hotel hardware now?" she asked. He glanced over. "I contain multitudes." "That is an appalling sentence. And yet you noticed." Something warm and helpless moved under her ribs. She hated that it could still happen while everything else was on fire. Later, when the worst of the storm settled into steady assault and dinner service was miraculously complete, Evelyn stood alone in the ballroom. Candles glowed along mirrored walls. Rain streaked the tall windows. The room looked exactly as it had on the last night before her father died, when he had danced with her mother after a charity auction because there had still been music and time and reasons to believe the world could be managed through elegance. "Thought I'd find you here." Damien's voice came from the doorway. She did not turn immediately. "Nathan loved this room," she said. "He once told me it would be magnificent as a members' club." Damien came to stand beside her. "He sees price where some people see inheritance." "And you?" He looked around the ballroom slowly. Candlelight caught the planes of his face and softened nothing. "I see the way your shoulders drop 2 inches every time you walk in here." The intimacy of that observation struck deeper than flirtation ever could. Evelyn turned then, and because the storm had already taken the evening beyond normal rules, because she was tired of lies and satin ghosts and men speaking on her behalf, she asked the question she had been carrying for a year like a hot coal. "Why did you really leave last summer?" His eyes held hers for one beat too long. Then the lights went out completely, plunging the ballroom into candlelit darkness, and somewhere in the shadows the old piano gave a single mournful note as if the house itself had decided timing was crueler than either of them. In the sudden dark, the ballroom changed from elegant to intimate. Candles became islands of gold along the mirrors and window ledges. Rain beat harder against the glass, and the sea beyond disappeared entirely, leaving only blackness and reflected flame. Evelyn heard the hotel generators trying and failing to catch. Somewhere downstairs, a guest laughed nervously. Somewhere else, crockery shattered. Damien did not move away. His face, lit unevenly by candlelight, looked harsher and more honest at once. She could see the fatigue beneath his control now, the kind that settled into a man only when he had spent too long forcing himself not to want something he believed he could not keep. "You asked why I left," he said. "Yes." His hand tightened at his side. "Because if I stayed, I was going to ask you not to marry any man who wasn't me, and at the time I had no right to ask for that." The room went still in a new way. Evelyn felt her heartbeat in her throat, her wrists, the space just below her sternum where fear and hope became indistinguishable. For a second she could not decide whether to laugh at the arrogance of the sentence or break from the force of hearing it too late. "You barely knew me." His mouth curved without humor. "That was the problem. I knew enough." He stepped closer, not touching her, and the heat between them arrived before contact did. "I knew you took bad coffee when you were anxious because you forgot to add sugar. I knew you argued hardest when you were frightened and softest when you were angry on someone else's behalf. I knew you walked the West Terrace at dawn when the accounts were bad because the sea made you feel smaller in a useful way. I knew that every room in this house changed when you walked into it. And I knew that if I stayed long enough, I would stop pretending business was why I came." Evelyn's breath caught so sharply it hurt. The storm battered the windows. Candle flames bent and steadied. All the months between last summer and now suddenly seemed absurdly thin, as if they had been made of paper and not time. "You left a message through lawyers," she said, "because pain made people reach for the most humiliating evidence." "Not even to me." His jaw flexed. "Because I came to your room first." She stared at him. "When?" "The night before I left. You and Nathan were in the library. He had his hand on your back. You were laughing at something he said. I stood outside your door for 5 minutes like a fool and decided you'd chosen something easier and wiser than me. You assumed." "Yes. You could have asked. I could have wrecked what looked like your peace." The unfairness of that, the brutal misguided restraint of it, filled her chest until it almost became tears. "So you left me to think you never cared." He looked at her with a kind of bleak steadiness. "That was kinder than what I wanted." She should have stepped back. She should have preserved the last of her common sense. Instead she asked, very quietly, "And what did you want?" His eyes dropped to her mouth. When they lifted again, there was nothing cool left in them. "You." The word broke whatever had been holding. Evelyn crossed the final inch between them and kissed him. It was not careful. It was not noble. It was a year of anger, misreading, restraint, and hunger finding somewhere to go. His hands came to her waist with terrifying restraint before tightening, as if even now he was asking permission through control rather than force. She tasted rain and whiskey from hours earlier and something darker that was only him. He kissed like a man who knew exactly how dangerous tenderness could be and had decided to risk it anyway. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested briefly against his jaw. "This is a catastrophe," she whispered. "Yes. I'm in the middle of a family disaster. I noticed." She laughed, breathless and wrecked. He made a sound that might have been relief. For a moment the ballroom, the scandal, the debt, the wedding dress abandoned in a car somewhere, all of it receded before the staggering simplicity of being exactly where she had wanted to be a year ago. Then reality returned with the cruelty of timing. A folder lay on the grand piano bench, one she had brought from her mother's rooms and forgotten in the confusion of the blackout. It had slid half open. A page protruded, thick cream paper with a header Evelyn knew too well. Vale Strategic Holdings. She stepped away from Damien and picked it up. The date at the top was 16 months old, months before her father's death. The subject line read, "Preliminary Acquisition Pathways, Marlowe House Estate." Beneath it, typed bullet points referenced debt leverage, inheritance vulnerability, and conditional restructuring opportunities. Damien's signature sat at the bottom in black ink. The kiss vanished from her body as if it had never happened. "What is this?" she asked. His expression changed instantly. "Evelyn. You were planning to acquire the hotel before my father even died." "No. That was a defensive draft." She looked up, ice spreading through her. "Defensive for whom?" "For your father. Do not lie to me now." "I'm not." She shook the paper once. "Debt leverage? Inheritance vulnerability? This is your language, Damien. This is you calculating how to gut us before Nathan ever entered the picture." He took a step forward. "Your father came to me because another buyer wanted the land and intended to close the hotel entirely. I drafted the hardest version first so I could beat them with their own numbers and then rewrite it in your family's favor." "By never telling me?" "Your father asked me not to." "Convenient." Pain flashed across his face, quick and naked. "You think I came back today for this? To stage some heroic interruption after engineering the whole thing? I think you always move first where property is concerned. That is not all I move first for." The bitterness in his voice only made her angrier, because part of her still wanted to believe him. She had never felt more split against herself. One half remembered the kiss and the confession. The other saw a signature on a page dated before the collapse of everything she loved. "You should go," she said. His stillness became almost frightening. "Evelyn. Go." He looked at her for a long moment, and in that silence she saw the exact second he understood that pushing harder now would lose her completely. He nodded once, a movement so slight it was almost invisible. "I'll have my team leave copies of everything in the map room," he said. "And I'll keep the press off the drive until morning." She hated that even leaving, he was still protecting her. When he turned and walked out of the ballroom, the room seemed instantly colder, the candles smaller, the storm louder. Evelyn stood alone beside the piano with the document shaking in her hand and the taste of him still on her mouth, realizing with a kind of exhausted despair that the cruelest thing about wanting the truth was that sometimes it arrived in pieces sharp enough to make every version of love look like strategy. Damien was gone by morning. Not vanished in the dramatic way he had once vanished from her life, but removed with brutal efficiency. His car no longer stood in the drive. The map room table was arranged with copied contracts, annotated timelines, and a note in his spare handwriting informing her that his counsel remained available if she chose to use them. No plea. No defense. No last attempt to sway her. Just order. Evelyn stared at the note while cold light from the breakfast room windows reached across the floorboards. She told herself the blankness in her chest was relief. It did not behave like relief. Relief did not make coffee taste like absence. Relief did not make her notice that the kitchen door hinge no longer squealed because someone had fixed it in the night. Her mother found her in the study just before noon. "You sent him away," she said softly. Evelyn did not look up from the spread of papers. "He left." Her mother came farther into the room, carrying another folder, older and more weathered than the rest. "Then before you decide what that means, you should read this." Inside were letters tied with faded ribbon, bank notices from the year before her father died, and one handwritten page in her father's unmistakable slant. Evelyn recognized the date immediately. It matched the acquisition draft she had found on the piano. Her hands went numb as she unfolded it. "If you are reading this, Christopher Vale's son has probably already frightened half the household and offended the wallpaper. Do not let that count entirely against him. He is harder in manner than in substance, which makes him useful in negotiations and likely disastrous in drawing rooms. I asked him to prepare the ugliest possible draft because the men pursuing this property understand only appetite and fear. If I can make them believe I will sell to Vale, they may retreat long enough for me to repair the debt position. If I fail, and if you ever need help after me, trust the son before you trust the gentleman." The words blurred. Her father had signed it with a line he had written in nearly every birthday card she could remember: "Some houses are saved by love. The lucky ones are saved by stubborn women first." Evelyn sat back hard in the chair. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Her mother's face folded with old shame. "Because after he died, I found the draft and not the letter. Nathan explained the language before I could think clearly, and by the time I found your father's note months later, I had already convinced myself the damage was done. Then Nathan kept solving things. Or appearing to. You let me hate him." "I let myself hate him too," her mother said, and the honesty of it was almost cruel. "It was easier than admitting I had not understood the men around me." Evelyn pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. The room smelled of dust and polish and old grief. Every certainty she had clung to now looked like something built on fog. "There's more," her mother said. "Nathan threatened Simon's debts. He said if we didn't cooperate, Simon would be prosecuted and the hotel would be publicly insolvent before the summer season. I was wrong. I know that. But I was not malicious, only frightened. Fear can still ruin things." "Yes," her mother said. "I know." By afternoon, another truth emerged from Damien's legal notes. To keep the bank from forcing immediate administration on Marlowe House, he had used one of his own companies to buy a tranche of the hotel's most toxic debt at a loss. He had done it quietly 6 weeks earlier. The purchase had infuriated his board because it served no clear strategic purpose and placed him in direct conflict with Ashford Capital over a site that, on paper, promised poor returns and endless maintenance headaches. He had done it anyway. Not to acquire the hotel. To hold the wolves back from the door. Evelyn felt sick. At 3 o'clock Margot entered with tea and a clipping from the business pages. "Thought you'd want to know," she said grimly. The article was short, sharp, and unmistakably sourced from London finance circles. Vale Holdings faces internal revolt after unexplained coastal debt maneuver. Shareholders seek emergency review. "He's under attack," Evelyn said. Margot sniffed. "Men like that are always under attack. Usually by other men like that." "Yes, but this is because of us." Margot set down the tray. "Then do something useful with the guilt." Useful. Marlowe House had always respected usefulness more than display. Cry later. Act now. By evening Evelyn had built a sequence from the documents Damien left, her father's letter, Simon's payments, and the redevelopment drafts. She also had, thanks to one deeply satisfying call from Margot's nephew in IT, access to a voicemail Nathan had left for Simon 3 nights earlier after too much scotch loosened his caution. In it, Nathan complained that Evelyn's sentimentality about the West Wing would evaporate once vows and signatures were finished. It was not enough for criminal charges on its own. But as narrative? As motive? As pressure? It was excellent. The board of Ashford Capital was holding its annual donor gala and investor dinner the next night in London. Nathan would be there. So would every financier, trustee, and journalist who mattered to his future. Damien, according to the article, had also been summoned to defend his debt move before a hostile board session held in the same building earlier that afternoon. The symmetry felt almost theatrical. Evelyn did not care. "We're going to London," she said. Her mother blinked. "We? You are staying here and not signing anything else for any breathing man." Margot made a pleased noise in the doorway. Evelyn looked down once more at her father's letter. "Trust the son before you trust the gentleman." It would have annoyed Damien intensely to be described that way. The thought almost made her smile and then very nearly made her cry. Instead she folded the letter carefully into her bag. She had kissed him in the dark and accused him in candlelight. She had used his worst language as proof against his best intentions. If he hated her now, she would deserve it. But she did not need forgiveness yet. She needed truth to stand in public where Nathan could not smooth it into another story. At dawn she left for London with Margot's nephew, a barrister cousin on her mother's side, 3 copied files, and enough anger to keep her upright through traffic. As the city rose around her in glass and rain, Evelyn looked at her reflection in the train window and hardly recognized the woman staring back. Not a bride. Not the grieving daughter people had arranged themselves around. Not the manageable fiancé Nathan had mistaken for an asset in silk. Something sharper. Something her father might have trusted. When the train slowed into the station, her phone lit with a message from an unknown number. Board review ended. He lost the vote. Gala starts at 7. If you mean to burn Ashford, tonight is your weather. There was no signature. There did not need to be. The ballroom at the Corinthian house glittered with the kind of money that preferred itself reflected. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne pyramids. Men in black ties speaking softly about acquisitions that would move more lives than governments ever admitted. Women in silk and diamonds who knew exactly which expressions counted as amusement and which counted as surrender. At the far end of the room, beneath a wall of projected sea blue light branding the evening as a celebration of heritage restoration and visionary investment, Nathan Ashford stood speaking to a circle of donors as if yesterday's failed wedding had already been filed under inconvenience. Evelyn watched him from the entrance and felt something inside her go perfectly still. She had chosen a black gown for tonight. Not bridal innocence, not revenge red, just severe black silk with a clean neckline and her hair pinned back from her face. If Nathan had hoped to paint her as fragile, he was about to have a difficult evening. Her barrister cousin, Helena, stood at her left holding a slim leather folio. Margot's nephew stood at her right with a phone, 2 backups, and the hard-eyed cheerfulness of a man who had waited his whole life to embarrass upper-class frauds in public. Behind them, 2 journalists Helena trusted had already been quietly primed to stay close once the first crack appeared. "Ready?" Helena murmured. "No," Evelyn said. "So let's go." Conversations faltered as she crossed the room. Heads turned. Recognition traveled in widening circles like ripples after glass breaks. Nathan saw her when she was 10 feet away. For a brief, exquisite moment, he forgot to manage his expression. "Evelyn," he said. No pet name. No performance of wounded tenderness. Just surprise edged with alarm. "Good evening," she said. The donors around him retreated by instinct, leaving enough space for disaster to breathe. Nathan recovered quickly. He always had that talent. "I'm glad you came," he said, with just enough warmth for bystanders. "I wanted to speak once emotions had settled." She smiled slightly. "Then this may disappoint you." His gaze flicked to Helena, to the men near the entrance, to the journalists pretending not to listen. Calculation sharpened. "This isn't the place. On the contrary. You seem to enjoy public storytelling." Color rose faintly under his composed face. "If this is about yesterday, I was trying to protect you. By implying I was unstable. I said you were distressed. You said I was drawn away, as if I lacked agency." A couple nearby turned more openly now. One of the journalists lifted her phone lower, already recording. Nathan changed tactics. "You've been influenced by Damien Vale. I know you believe he came to rescue your family, but he has a financial history with your property that you don't fully understand." The words might have worked 24 hours earlier. Today they only exposed the outdated script he still thought he controlled. "Actually," Evelyn said, taking Helena's folio and withdrawing a copy of her father's letter, "I understand it much better now than you hoped I ever would." She let him see the handwriting before she handed a second copy to the nearest journalist. His face lost a degree of color. "What is that?" he asked. "A letter from my father explaining that he asked Damien Vale to prepare an aggressive draft to scare off predatory buyers. That proves nothing. Perhaps this will help." She nodded once to Margot's nephew, who pressed play. Nathan's own voice did not fill the ballroom. Simon's did first, anxious and slurred through phone static. Then Nathan's answer came, bored and irritated, each word amplified through the hidden speaker now linked to the room's adjacent presentation system thanks to a bribe and excellent timing. "She's too sentimental about the West Wing. Once vows and signatures are finished, sentiment stops mattering. Smile until then." The effect was almost physically visible. Donors stiffened. Someone swore under his breath. Nathan moved forward fast enough to grab for the device, but Helena stepped between them with barrister precision. "Touch him," she said pleasantly, "and I add a salt to tonight's entertainment." Nathan's control began to crack around the eyes. "This is illegal." "So is inducement under fraudulent representation," Helena replied. Evelyn held his gaze. "Did you think I'd never read the clauses you hid? That my mother's fear would remain easier to use than my anger?" His voice dropped. "You are making a terrible mistake." "No," she said. "That was the dress." A ripple of shocked laughter moved through the edges of the room. "Good." Humiliation mattered to men like Nathan because it made hierarchy visible. He tried again, lower, urgent now. "If you push this, the bank will force administration on the hotel." A new voice answered from behind him. "No," Damien said, "it won't." The room shifted before Evelyn turned. She knew the sound of him now too well for surprise. Damien stood at the edge of the crowd in a midnight black tuxedo that made the bruising fatigue beneath his eyes more obvious, not less. He looked as if the board vote had cost him sleep, blood, or both. Yet he stood with the same dangerous steadiness he had carried into her wedding, as though collapse were a private luxury he did not permit himself until the work was done. Nathan stared. "You lost the vote." Damien's mouth tilted coldly. "On my company review. Not on my private holdings." He stepped beside Evelyn and placed a document on the nearest cocktail table. An hour ago, the Marlowe debt package was transferred into an independent preservation trust. Interim control rests with Miss Marlowe pending full civil review of fraudulent inducement claims against Ashford Capital and any related parties. Murmurs spread like fire meeting curtains. Nathan looked from the paper to Damien to Evelyn, and for the first time there was nothing smooth left in him. "You can't do that." "I already did," Damien said. "That debt wasn't yours alone to move. Then challenge it in court. I look forward to discovery." The journalists were no longer pretending. Cameras lifted. Questions flew. Which related parties? Was Simon Marlowe. The ballroom at the Corinthian house glittered with the kind of money that preferred itself reflected. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne pyramids. Men in black ties speaking softly about acquisitions that would move more lives than governments ever admitted. Women in silk and diamonds who knew exactly which expressions counted as amusement and which counted as surrender. At the far end of the room, beneath a wall of blue light branding the evening as a celebration of heritage and visionary investment, Nathan Ashford stood speaking to donors as if yesterday's ruined wedding had already been filed under inconvenience. Evelyn watched him from the entrance and felt something inside her go perfectly still. She had chosen black for tonight. Not bridal innocence, not revenge red. Just black silk, severe lines, and her hair pinned back from her face. If Nathan hoped to paint her as fragile, he was about to have a difficult evening. Her barrister cousin Helena stood at her left holding a leather folio. Margot's nephew stood at her right with a phone, 2 backups, and the hard-eyed cheerfulness of a man who had waited his whole life to embarrass the powerful in public. 2 journalists Helena trusted were already in the room, pretending disinterest badly. "Ready?" Helena murmured. "No," Evelyn said. "So let's go." Conversations faltered as she crossed the ballroom. Recognition traveled in widening circles. Nathan saw her when she was 10 feet away, and for one exquisite moment he forgot to manage his face. "Evelyn," he said. No pet name. No performance of concern. Just surprise edged with alarm. "Good evening." The donors around him retreated on instinct, leaving enough space for disaster to breathe. Nathan recovered quickly. He always had that talent. "I'm glad you came," he said, warm enough for witnesses. "I wanted to speak once emotions had settled." She smiled slightly. "Then this may disappoint you." His gaze flicked to Helena, to the journalists, to the doors. Calculation sharpened. "This isn't the place." "On the contrary. You seem to enjoy public storytelling." Color rose faintly under his composed face. "If this is about yesterday, I was trying to protect you." "By implying I was unstable?" "I said you were distressed. You said I was drawn away, as if I lacked agency." A couple nearby turned more openly now. One journalist lowered her phone, already recording. Nathan changed tactics. "You've been influenced by Damien Vale. I know you believe he came to rescue your family, but he has a financial history with your property that you do not fully understand." The words might have worked 24 hours earlier. Today they only exposed how old his script had become. "Actually," Evelyn said, opening Helena's folio, "I understand it much better now than you hoped I ever would." She let him see her father's handwriting before handing a copy to the nearest journalist. Nathan's face lost a degree of color. "What is that?" "A letter from my father explaining that he asked Damien Vale to prepare an aggressive draft to scare off predatory buyers." "That proves nothing. Perhaps this will help." She nodded once to Margot's nephew, who pressed play. First came Simon's anxious, slurred voice through phone static. Then Nathan's answer, bored and irritated, each word amplified through a speaker discreetly connected to the room's presentation system. "She's too sentimental about the West Wing. Once vows and signatures are finished, sentiment stops mattering. Smile until then." The effect was almost visible. Donors stiffened. Someone swore under his breath. Nathan lunged for the device, but Helena stepped between them with barrister precision. "Touch him," she said pleasantly, "and I add a salt to tonight's entertainment." Nathan's control cracked around the eyes. "This is illegal. So is inducement under fraudulent representation." Evelyn held his gaze. "Did you think I'd never read the clauses you hid? That my mother's fear would remain easier to use than my anger?" His voice dropped. "You are making a terrible mistake." "No," she said. "That was the dress." A ripple of shocked laughter moved through the room. Good. Humiliation mattered to men like Nathan because it made hierarchy visible. He tried once more. If you push this, the bank will force administration on the hotel. A new voice answered from behind him. No, Damien said, it won't. The room shifted before Evelyn turned. Damien stood at the edge of the crowd in a midnight black tuxedo that made the bruising fatigue beneath his eyes more obvious, not less. He looked as if the board vote had cost him blood and sleep. Yet he carried the same dangerous steadiness he had brought into her wedding, as though collapse were a private luxury he did not permit himself until the work was done. Nathan stared. You lost the vote. On my company review, Damien said. Not on my private holdings. He stepped beside Evelyn and placed a document on the nearest table. An hour ago, the Marlowe debt package was transferred into an independent preservation trust. Interim control rests with Miss Marlowe pending civil review of Ashford Capital's conduct. Murmurs spread like fire meeting curtains. Nathan looked from the paper to Damien to Evelyn, and for the first time there was nothing smooth left in him. You can't do that. I already did. That debt wasn't yours alone to move. Then challenge it in court. I look forward to discovery. Now the journalists stopped pretending altogether. Cameras lifted. Questions flew. Was Simon involved? Was the hotel to be redeveloped after the marriage? Did Nathan routinely structure romance as acquisition? Nathan finally snapped. Everything I did was to save that place from insolvency, he said. Her father ruined it with sentiment and vanity, and she would have done the same. You cannot run a cliffside monument on grief and wallpaper. The insult landed harder because it was honest in the wrong direction. Nathan had never understood that what he called sentiment was often the labor of memory holding a house together until numbers could catch up. Evelyn stepped closer. You're right, she said quietly. You cannot run it on grief alone. He seemed almost relieved for one hopeful second. Then she finished. Which is why you'll never touch it. Security arrived moments later, summoned by someone with better instincts than loyalty. Nathan adjusted his cuff, tried to recover composure, and announced he would answer no further questions without counsel. But the room had already decided what he was. As he was escorted away, he looked not at Evelyn but at Damien. The hatred in that look was stripped clean of pretense. This isn't over, Nathan said. Damien's gaze did not flicker. For you, maybe. When the doors shut behind Nathan, the ballroom exhaled. Conversation rose in shocked fragments. Phones lit across the room. Helena squeezed Evelyn's forearm and went hunting the most important reporter present. Margot's nephew looked like a man who had just watched class warfare produce a useful result. Evelyn, however, felt only exhaustion and the dangerous awareness of Damien standing beside her. You shouldn't have come, she said, though every pulse in her body argued otherwise. He looked down at her. I was under the impression you were about to start a war without backup. I had backup. You had legal support and a boy with electronics. That is not the same thing. Against all reason, she laughed. The nearest camera turned toward them, and the room's curiosity sharpened from scandal to romance. Evelyn saw it at the same time he did. If we stay here, she murmured, tomorrow's headlines become something else. Damien offered his arm with grave irony. Then perhaps, Miss Marlowe, we should leave before the nation decides whether to seat us together at breakfast. She took his arm. For once, she did not feel rescued. She felt chosen. They left through the service corridor, borrowed a freight lift that smelled faintly of polish and old roses, and emerged in a rain-slick alley behind the Corinthian where the city shone in broken gold across the pavement. For one suspended second neither of them spoke. The gala still thundered behind the walls. Phones would already be buzzing through London, then the county, then every circle that enjoyed wealth only slightly less than scandal. Nathan's future was unraveling by the minute. Marlowe House had breathing space. The war, in practical terms, had shifted. And yet the thing pressing hardest against Evelyn's ribs had almost nothing to do with law. You lost your board over the hotel, she said. Damien slipped his hands into his pockets. Not over the hotel. Over what, then? His gaze settled on her with unnerving steadiness. Over refusing to let them turn your family into an opportunity. That is very noble in retrospect. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I'm rarely noble in real time. Rain misted the mouth of the alley. A black car waited at the curb, but the driver had the good sense to remain inside. Evelyn hugged her wrap closer. I found my father's letter. Something in Damien's face went taut and still. And I was wrong. He looked away for half a breath, as if the words landed somewhere he had not armored. That depends what you thought. I thought you had built a trap and returned in time to make yourself look heroic. I thought every decent thing you did had a price hidden under it. His jaw flexed. Fair enough. No, she said. Understandable, perhaps. But not fair. He turned back to her slowly. You don't owe me absolution. That is unfortunate, because I'm not offering absolution. I'm offering an apology. The city noise seemed to recede. Evelyn took a breath that reached all the way into the sorest parts of her. Yesterday I accused you with a document I did not understand. I kissed you before that and doubted you after it. I let fear make me cruel where you had, inconveniently, been trying to save me. So if your preferred response is to be insufferable about this for the next decade, I will deserve it. To her immense relief, the corner of his mouth moved. A decade seems conservative. I knew you'd say that. He stepped closer, not close enough to trap, only close enough to alter the air. Evelyn, I was not innocent. I should have told you the truth last year. I should have fought harder when you chose what looked safe. I am not in the habit of losing things I want, and leaving you behind is still the most incompetent decision I have ever made. Warmth and sorrow crossed inside her so quickly they felt like the same thing. You assumed I'd chosen Nathan. I saw him touch your back and believed your face was peaceful. It wasn't peace, she said quietly. It was relief. There is a difference. He absorbed that with the expression of a man receiving a wound too late to dodge it. I know that now. She looked at him in the rain-blue light, at the tired severity of his features, the impossible discipline he wore like another coat, the love that had apparently lived in every hard choice between them and still somehow remained standing. Something inside her, strained for months between duty and desire, finally gave way. What happens now? She asked. Legally. Weeks of motions. A forensic review. Ugly headlines. Simon will bargain the second he realizes Nathan cannot shield him. I meant us. That, Damien said, is considerably more dangerous. Good. The word surprised them both. He studied her. Good. I have had enough of safe things that rot from the inside. I would prefer something dangerous that tells the truth. This time when he moved closer, there was nothing cautious in it except the final inch, which he still gave her to cross or refuse. Evelyn crossed it. His kiss in the alley was slower than the one in the ballroom and infinitely more devastating. It held no shock now, only recognition. Rain cooled her bare shoulders. His hand came to the back of her neck with unbearable care. The city carried on around them as if nothing historic had happened, which seemed rude but also useful. When they broke apart, she stayed close enough to feel his breath. Take me home, she said. His eyes darkened. That sentence contains several possibilities. I mean Marlowe House. I know, he said, though disappointment and relief both flickered through his voice. I simply enjoy watching you realize you can unsettle me. The drive back stretched past midnight. Neither spoke much. Once, while the city dissolved into motorways and then into darker roads edged by hedgerows, Evelyn fell asleep against the window and woke to find Damien's coat draped over her despite the awkward angle it must have required. She pretended not to notice until he pretended not to notice her pretending. At Marlowe House, the lamps in the lobby still burned low. Margot emerged from nowhere, as legend said she always would when important things occurred after midnight. She took one look at Evelyn's face, one look at Damien, and said only, "Well. Try not to scandalize the portraits." Evelyn laughed under her breath as they climbed the main staircase. The landing outside her room was shadowed, quiet, familiar. For the first time all day no document waited between them, no reporter, no witness, no convenient lie. Damien stopped one step below her. The difference in height put his eyes level with hers. "I can leave," he said. "If that's what you need." Need was the wrong measure now. Need had built too many cages already. She touched his face, feeling the roughness at his jaw, the tired warmth of his skin. "I need honesty. Can you manage that, Mr. Vale?" His hand covered hers. "Barely." "Then start here. Don't disappear again." Something fierce and unguarded moved through his expression. "Never," he said. She believed him. Not because men's promises were sacred. Because this one sounded like a vow he had already been keeping in ruined, imperfect ways long before either of them knew how to name it. She drew him into her room and closed the door, not for secrecy but for peace. Outside, the sea battered the cliffs. Inside, at last, they stopped standing on opposite sides of the storm. Morning at Marlowe House arrived clear, bright, and almost offensively beautiful. After days of rain, the sky opened in a pale sweep above the cliffs, and sunlight turned the sea from iron to glass. Gulls wheeled over the headland. The hydrangeas along the west terrace looked newly washed. If the world felt any shame for the chaos it had hosted, it concealed it expertly. Evelyn woke before Damien but not before awareness. His arm lay warm across her waist. One corner of the curtain breathed in the open window. For several quiet seconds she did nothing except exist inside the strangeness of peace and the even stranger realization that it did not frighten her. The night had not solved everything. Nathan remained litigious. Simon remained weak. The trust would need defending. The hotel still carried debt enough to sour any romantic notion of rescue. But truth had finally entered the building, and truth, unlike charm, could hold weight. Damien stirred when she slipped from the bed. By the time she returned from the window, he was awake, propped on one elbow, looking less like a titan of finance and more like a man surprised to find himself somewhere he had wanted for too long. "You're staring at the sea like you own it," he said. "I'm staring at the West Wing like it still exists. It will continue to." The certainty in his voice made her turn. "You sound very confident for a man whose board attempted mutiny." "My board disapproves of sentiment until sentiment produces returns." "And will it?" His mouth curved. "Ask me again after breakfast and a review of seasonal occupancy." The answer was ridiculous, practical, and so deeply him that she crossed the room just to kiss him for it. They went downstairs together to a lobby already alive with consequence. Helena had arrived at dawn with 3 newspapers and a grin sharp enough to file metal. Nathan's face occupied the lower fold of 2 front pages beneath headlines about wedding scandal, fraud allegations, and investor panic. Simon, having discovered that silence no longer bought protection, had sent a message through counsel requesting leniency in exchange for cooperation. "Coward," Margot said with admiration. "He may yet become useful." Evelyn stood at the center table beneath the chandelier and felt, for the first time in months, not hunted but positioned. By noon the house was full of movement. Surveyors hired by the Preservation Trust documented existing damage before anyone could invent new deterioration. Staff brought guest ledgers and deferred maintenance records to the map room. Damien's legal team arrived carrying laptops, coffee, and expensive skepticism. Helena commandeered the library. Margot fed everyone without asking permission. The hotel, which had spent so long being defended in theory, was finally being fought for in detail. That afternoon Evelyn met with the bank by video in her father's study. She expected condescension and received it within minutes. One senior lender suggested that, given recent emotional upheaval, temporary external management might still be advisable. Evelyn smiled in the polished, dangerous way she had perfected this week. Thank you. I've discovered temporary external management tends to arrive wearing cuff links and carrying demolition plans, so will decline. Damien, seated just out of frame, covered his mouth with one hand. She knew he was hiding amusement. The banker did not. By evening they had a path. If summer occupancy rose, if the events wing reopened in phases, if the trust secured heritage grants for the west facade, Marlowe House could survive without selling its bones. It would require discipline, cash, and several miracles. Evelyn had always liked specific challenges more than vague comfort. Near sunset she walked the west terrace alone. The sea burned gold below the cliffs. Wind tugged at her hair and cooled the back of her neck. Somewhere behind her, inside the hotel, life continued in useful noises, trays, footsteps, distant laughter from guests who had paid for scenery and accidentally checked into a resurrection. "You have that look again," Damien said, coming to stand beside her. "What look?" "The one that means you're in love with a battle plan." She smiled at the horizon. "Perhaps I inherited poor judgment." "No. You inherited loyalty and then taught it teeth." The compliment settled more deeply than flattery would have. She turned toward him. In the clear evening light he looked less armored than usual, as if this place had begun doing to him what it did to everyone it claimed, exposing the human shape beneath the role. "Nathan will keep trying," she said. "I know. And if the trust fails? Then we build another structure around it. And another after that." He paused. "Evelyn, I am not here because the hotel is a project. I know that too." He exhaled, some old reserve leaving him with the breath. "Good. Because I can finance roofs and lawsuits without difficulty. The harder question is whether you want me here when there's nothing dramatic left to save." She thought of the wedding aisle, the morning room, the ballroom blackout, the alley in London, the way he had loved her in methods before he ever said the word. Then she thought of breakfasts, winter accounts, storms, staff crises, and all the ordinary hours that truly tested devotion. "I don't want dramatic," she said. "I want durable." His gaze searched hers, perhaps for hesitation, perhaps for mercy. He found neither. "Then tell me what durable looks like." Evelyn took his hand and placed it on the terrace wall warmed by evening sun. "This house stays standing. My mother stops apologizing for surviving. Margot terrorizes contractors into competence. Simon testifies and pays us back until the end of civilization. I run the hotel properly. You stop making sacrifices in silence and call me before detonating public events." A difficult list. "I'm not finished." "Of course you aren't." She stepped closer. "Durable also looks like this. No disappearing. No deciding for me what I can bear. No noble exits drafted by lawyers." His fingers tightened around hers. "Agreed. And," she said, allowing the smile she had earned, "it may eventually involve breakfast seating." That finally made him laugh, low and helpless and real. The sound moved through her like light. Weeks later, when Simon's testimony broke the last of Nathan's defenses and the trust secured its first grant, the hotel held a small midsummer supper in the restored garden court. No orchestra. No society spectacle. Just candlelight, salt air, friends who had stayed, and the soft disorder of a place learning how to be loved honestly again. After dessert Damien drew her aside beneath the climbing roses, reached into his pocket, and looked at her with the same fierce steadiness he had carried into her ruined wedding and every battlefield since. "If you say yes now," he whispered, "nothing in this world will ever own you but your own heart." Her answer did not shake. It rang. When he kissed her, Marlowe House stood behind them battered but unbowed, full of rooms that had seen grief, deceit, desire, and now, at last, the beginning of something honest enough to survive all four.